What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actors completely loses it on live television? In just 26 seconds, a friendly chat turned into the most explosive showdown Graham Norton's show has ever witnessed. And it all ended with Bill Nighy storming off the stage in absolute fury. Before we dive into this unbelievable drama, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they don't want you to see, and the moments that change everything. You won't want to miss what happens next. Last night's episode of The Graham Norton Show was supposed to be another fun Friday evening with laughs, stories, and celebrity banter. Bill Nighy, the distinguished actor known for his cool demeanor and gentleman's reputation, was sitting on that famous red couch alongside two other guests. The studio audience was packed, everyone excited to hear stories from one of Britain's finest actors. The cameras were rolling live, and nobody, absolutely nobody, could have predicted what was about to unfold. The show had started exactly like it always does. The upbeat music played, Graham Norton bounced onto the stage with his signature energy, waving to the crowd who cheered and applauded. He made his usual opening jokes, got some laughs, and introduced his guests one by one. When Bill Nighy's name was announced, the audience erupted with warm applause. He's the kind of actor everyone loves, the sophisticated British gentleman with that distinctive voice and charming presence. He walked out, shook Graham's hand, and settled into the red couch with a relaxed smile. The first 20 minutes of the interview went smoothly. Too smoothly, in hindsight. Bill talked about his morning routine, made the audience laugh with a story about forgetting his lines during a theater performance years ago, and discussed his love of jazz music. Graham was in his element, bouncing between guests, facilitating conversation, making everyone comfortable. The other two guests, a popular comedian and a rising pop star, chimed in with their own anecdotes. It was textbook Graham Norton, the perfect Friday night entertainment that millions of viewers tune in for every week. But then something shifted in the air, so subtle at first that most people in the audience didn't even notice it. Graham Norton started the conversation with Bill in his usual playful way, leaning forward with that mischievous glint in his eye that his fans know so well. "So, Bill," he said, his voice warm and friendly, "tell us about this new film. You're playing a retired spy, is that right? Someone with a dark past catching up with him?" Bill smiled and nodded. "Yes, that's right. He's a man who spent his entire career making difficult choices, doing things for his country that he's not particularly proud of, and now in his retirement, those choices come back to haunt him. It's quite a complex character study, actually." The audience murmured appreciatively. Graham pressed on. "And do you draw on anything from your own life for a role like that? Any dark secrets in Bill Nighy's past we should know about?" He said it with a laugh, clearly joking, and the audience chuckled along. Bill played along beautifully. "Well, Graham, I once took the last biscuit from the craft services table on set without asking if anyone else wanted it. I still wake up at night thinking about that." The audience laughed, and even the other guests grinned. This was the Bill Nighy everyone expected, charming and self-deprecating. But then Graham's expression changed slightly, like he'd just remembered something he wanted to bring up. He sat back in his chair and said, "You know, speaking of difficult choices and things from the past, I was reading through some of your old interviews, and I came across something fascinating from about 15 years ago." Bill's smile remained, but something flickered in his eyes. Just for a second. Most people wouldn't have caught it, but the camera did. "Oh, yes?" he said, his voice still pleasant. Graham continued, "You gave this interview where you talked quite passionately about directors and how some of them treat actors like, and I quote, puppets on strings, dancing for someone else's vision without any room for creativity or genuine expression. It was quite a strong statement." The studio got a little quieter. The other guests glanced at Bill, unsure where this was going. Bill's smile faded just slightly. He shifted in his seat. "I'm sorry. What exactly are you bringing that up for?" His voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it now, something sharp. Graham seemed surprised by the reaction. He laughed nervously. "Oh, come on, Bill. It was just a funny little comment you made back then. I thought it was interesting. We all say things about our work, don't we? I certainly say plenty about television executives." He looked to the audience for support. and a few people laughed uncertainly. But Bill didn't laugh. He sat up straighter, his posture becoming more rigid. That wasn't a funny little comment, Graham. That was me speaking honestly about real problems in this industry, problems that actors face every single day. And you're sitting here trying to turn it into a punchline for your audience. The temperature in the studio dropped about 10 degrees. The other guests exchanged worried looks. The comedian who'd been so chatty earlier suddenly found his shoes very interesting. Graham's smile became more forced. Bill, I really didn't mean any offense. I just thought it was an interesting point you made, that's all. A lot of people agreed with you at the time. Bill leaned forward now, his eyes locked on Graham. Then why bring it up like it's some amusing anecdote? Why frame it as this quirky thing I said, rather than treating it as the serious criticism it was meant to be? Graham shifted in his chair, and you could see him trying to regain control of the situation. He's a professional. He's handled thousands of interviews. He knows how to smooth things over. Look, Bill, I bring up past interviews all the time on this show. That's part of what we do here. We look back at people's careers. We examine how they've grown and changed. We have a laugh about things they said 10 or 20 years ago. It's not personal. It's just part of the conversation. Not personal? Bill's voice rose slightly. And that's when everyone in the studio knew this wasn't just going to blow over. You make everything personal, Graham. That's your whole approach to these interviews, isn't it? Get people relaxed. Get them comfortable on your couch. And then dig into their past for that one moment that might spark some controversy or generate a headline. Graham's face flushed. The smile was completely gone now. Now, wait, just a minute. That is completely unfair. I have never, and I mean never, tried to make anyone look bad on this show. My entire career has been built on celebrating people, giving them a platform where they can be themselves and share their stories in a safe, fun environment. Bill let out a short, bitter laugh. Oh, please, Graham. You celebrate people as long as they play the game your way, as long as they give you the sound bites and the laughs, and perform exactly how you want them to perform. But the moment someone tries to have a genuine conversation, or express something real, something that matters, you turn it into entertainment. You trivialize it. The audience was dead silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every uncomfortable second of this train wreck happening in real time. Graham's producer, off camera, was making frantic hand signals, trying to get them to take a break, to go to commercial, anything to stop this disaster. Graham stood up from his chair suddenly, and the audience gasped. In all the years of the Graham Norton Show, through hundreds and hundreds of episodes, people couldn't remember him ever standing up in the middle of an interview like this. His face was red now, genuinely angry. You know what, Bill? He said, his voice tight with controlled fury. If you didn't want to be here tonight, if you didn't want to do this interview, if you thought it was beneath you, you could have just said no. Nobody forced you to sit on this couch. Nobody dragged you here against your will. Bill stood up too, matching Graham's energy, and now both men were on their feet with that famous red couch between them. The physical space between them crackled with tension. I came here, Bill said, his voice loud and clear, projecting the way only a trained theater actor can, because I thought we could have an actual, meaningful conversation. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could talk about the work, about the craft, about the things that actually matter in this business. But no, you had to go digging through my past for controversy, for that little moment that might go viral on social media. That is absolute bullshit, Graham shot back, and the audience gasped audibly at the swearing. Graham Norton doesn't swear on his show. This was real anger now, not performance, not entertainment. This was a man whose professionalism had been questioned, and he wasn't taking it quietly. You actors, you all love to complain about interviews, about the media, about how hard your lives are, about how misunderstood you are. But you show up every single time because you need us just as much as we need you. Don't pretend you're above this world when you're right here in it. Bill's face went red. His hands clenched at his sides. I'm not pretending anything. I'm telling you straight to your face, on your stage, in front of all these people, that what you just did was cheap and disrespectful. You took something I said about genuine problems in this industry, problems that affect people's livelihoods and creative fulfillment, and you tried to mock it for a cheap laugh. I wasn't mocking you, Graham shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. The other guests looked absolutely terrified, pressed back into the couch cushions, wishing they could disappear. Some audience members were filming on their phones despite the rules against it, knowing they were witnessing television history. "I was trying to have a conversation, Bill. A bloody conversation. But apparently you're too sensitive, too precious to handle anyone even mentioning your past statements." Bill laughed, but it was an ugly sound, harsh and cold. "Too sensitive? That's your defense? That's really the best you can come up with? You built an entire empire, an entire career, on making people feel comfortable enough to let their guard down and spill their secrets on your couch, and now you're upset because someone is finally calling you out on your tactics, on your methods." Graham stepped closer to the couch, his hands gesturing emphatically. "My tactics? What bloody tactics? I ask questions. I make jokes. I create an environment where people can relax and be themselves instead of being stiff and boring. If that's a crime, if that makes me some kind of manipulative monster, then lock me up right now. You create an environment where people perform for you," Bill countered, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "There's a massive difference, Graham, between being yourself and performing a version of yourself that you think will play well with an audience. And you know exactly how to push people into that performance. You're brilliant at it, actually. It's what makes you successful. But don't pretend it's something noble or pure." The producer was practically having a breakdown off camera, making slashing motions across his throat, but neither man was paying any attention. They were locked in now, both of them too angry, too invested, too hurt to back down. The studio lights seemed harsher somehow, the cameras more invasive, the whole situation surreal. Graham's voice got quieter, but somehow it was more intense, more cutting. "You know what I think? I think you came on this show tonight looking for a fight. I think you wanted this to happen because now you get to play the victim, the serious theatrical actor who's too good for light entertainment, too cultured for mainstream television. It makes you feel superior, doesn't it?" Bill shook his head slowly, his jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscles working. "That's what you tell yourself, is it? That's how you rationalize this? Anyone who doesn't worship at your altar, anyone who doesn't bow down and thank you for the privilege of sitting on your couch must be looking for attention? Must be trying to create drama? Maybe, Graham. Just maybe. I'm calling out what I see because somebody bloody well needs to, and everyone else is too afraid or too polite." "Then get off my show," Graham said suddenly, his voice cold and final, each word deliberate and clear. "If it's so terrible, if I'm so awful, if this is such a waste of your valuable time, then leave. Walk off. Nobody's keeping you here. The door's right there." The studio held its breath. Millions of viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. This was the point of no return. Everyone could feel it. Bill stared at Graham for a long, loaded moment. The silence stretched out, painful and tense. You could hear someone in the audience coughing nervously, the rustle of clothing as people shifted uncomfortably, the hum of the stage lights overhead. Then Bill reached up slowly and unclipped his microphone from his collar. The small black device came free with a soft click that the boom microphones picked up perfectly. He held it for a second, looking at it, then let it drop onto the red couch. It hit the cushion with a soft thud that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. "You know what?" Bill said, his voice surprisingly calm now, almost eerily so after all the shouting. "I think I will." He turned toward the side of the stage and started walking. Not running, not storming off in a rage, but walking with purpose, with dignity, his back straight and his head held high. Graham called after him, his voice sharp with anger and maybe something else, maybe hurt. "Oh, very dramatic, Bill. Very theatrical. This is exactly what you wanted, isn't it? Your big moment. I'm sure this is precisely what you planned." Bill stopped. His hand was already pushing aside the heavy curtain that led backstage, but he stopped and turned back one more time. His face was composed now, all the anger replaced with something colder, more final. "What I wanted, Graham, was a conversation between professionals. What I got was a circus. And you're the bloody ringmaster." His voice echoed through the studio one last time, and then he was gone, disappearing into the wings, past the shocked camera operators and sound technicians who pressed themselves against the walls to let him pass. Graham stood there in the middle of his stage, breathing hard, his face still flushed red, his carefully styled hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. The audience didn't know what to do. Should they applaud? Should they sit in silence? Were they supposed to react at all? The other guests on the couch looked like they desperately wanted to sink through the cushions and disappear completely from existence. The control room must have been absolute chaos, with directors and producers screaming at each other about what to do, whether to cut away, whether to end the show early, whether to pretend this never happened, or lean into the madness. But the cameras kept rolling because this was live television, and there was nowhere to hide from what had just unfolded in front of millions of viewers. Graham finally turned to face the cameras, and you could see him trying to pull himself together, trying to be professional, trying to salvage something from this catastrophe. "Well," he said, his voice shaky and not quite his usual confident tone, "that's certainly something we'll all remember for a while, isn't it?" He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His hands were trembling slightly as he gestured vaguely toward the empty space where Bill had been standing moments before. The other guests made weak attempts to laugh or say something to break the tension, but their hearts clearly weren't in it. The comedian, who'd been so funny earlier in the show, could barely string a sentence together. The pop star just stared wide-eyed, looking like a deer caught in headlights, probably thanking whatever god she believed in that she hadn't been the target of that confrontation. But it was too late to recover. The damage was done, written in permanent ink across live television history. Bill Nighy had walked off the Graham Norton show after the most intense, most personal, most devastating argument anyone had ever seen on that stage. The friendly red couch that usually hosted laughter and champagne and silly games had become a battlefield, and everyone who watched it knew they'd witnessed something they'd never forget. The studio light seemed brighter now, more harsh, exposing every uncomfortable moment with unforgiving clarity. Graham attempted to transition to the next segment, something about a musical performance, but his voice kept catching. He cleared his throat multiple times. The audience could see sweat on his forehead under those bright lights, could see the way his jaw was clenched, could see he was holding on to his composure by the thinnest of threads. One audience member later described the atmosphere as like being at a funeral where nobody knows what to say. The usual warmth and fun had been completely sucked out of the room, replaced by this awful, heavy tension that pressed down on everyone's shoulders. People who'd come for a fun Friday night out were instead witnessing the complete implosion of two highly respected professionals, and nobody knew how to process it. Meanwhile, backstage, Bill was moving through the corridors with purpose. Makeup artists and production assistants scattered out of his way, their mouths hanging open in shock. Nobody knew what to say to him. Do you try to stop him? Do you apologize? Do you pretend nothing happened? He didn't give anyone the chance to figure it out. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, quick and determined, the sound of a man who'd made his decision and wasn't looking back. He went straight to his dressing room, the door with his name on a simple white card. Inside, his coat was hanging neatly on a hook, his phone charging on the small table, a half-drunk cup of tea gone cold. The room that had been a peaceful sanctuary an hour ago now felt suffocating. He grabbed his coat and shrugged it on, the familiar weight of it somehow grounding him. His belongings went into his bag quickly, efficiently. Years of touring and performing had taught him how to pack fast. A junior production assistant appeared in the doorway, young and terrified, probably sent by someone higher up who didn't have the courage to come themselves. "Mr. Nighy, is there anything we can do? Is there anything you need?" The poor kid's voice was shaking. Bill looked at him for a moment, and his expression softened just slightly. None of this was this young person's fault. "No, thank you, I'm fine. Just tell your bosses I won't be returning." His voice was calm now, the fire from the stage completely extinguished, replaced by cold resolution. "But sir, there's still 20 minutes left of the show. We could work something out. Maybe you could come back and—" "I won't be returning," Bill repeated, firmer this time. "Not tonight, not ever." He picked up his bag and headed for the exit. The production assistant stepped aside quickly, pressing himself against the wall. Back in the studio, Graham was gamely trying to continue the show, but it was painfully obvious that nobody's heart was in it anymore. He asked his remaining guests questions about their projects, but the answers were awkward and stilted. Every conversation felt hollow after what they'd all just witnessed. The comedian tried to make a joke about the tension, something about, well, that escalated quickly. But it landed with a thud. Nobody laughed. The audience's applause was forced and uncomfortable when it came at all. The energy had been completely sucked out of the room, replaced by a weird mix of shock and second-hand embarrassment. Graham kept glancing toward the side of the stage, as if expecting Bill to come back, to return with an apology or an explanation, to somehow fix what had been broken. But the wings remained empty. The show trudged on like a wounded animal, limping toward the finish line. Every minute felt like an hour. The musical guest performed, but even the upbeat pop song couldn't shake the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the studio like fog. The live studio audience would file out tonight with a story they'd tell for years, probably for the rest of their lives. I was there the night Bill Nighy stormed off Graham Norton. It would be their claim to fame, their connection to television history, their "you'll never believe what I saw" tale for dinner parties and family gatherings. They were already checking their phones during the commercial breaks, seeing messages from friends who were watching at home, seeing the clip starting to spread across social media like wildfire, wondering how fast this would explode across the internet. In homes across the country, people were rewinding their DVRs, watching the confrontation again and again, trying to figure out exactly when it went wrong, analyzing every word, every gesture, every facial expression. Twitter was exploding with reactions, hot takes, think pieces being written in real time. Some people sided with Bill, calling him brave for standing up to what they saw as trivial celebrity culture. Others defended Graham, saying he was just doing his job and Bill had overreacted. The debate was already raging before the show had even finished. And Bill? He pushed through the stage door into the cold London night air, the sounds of the studio fading behind him as the heavy door swung shut with a solid, final thunk. The contrast was stark, the warm chaos of the studio replaced by the quiet stillness of the night. The air bit at his face, cold and clean, washing away the stuffiness of the studio. He could see his breath in little clouds. A car was waiting for him, as cars always wait for celebrities leaving television studios. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, had been listening to the show on the radio in the car. He'd heard everything. He opened the back door without a word, understanding that sometimes the best service is silence. Bill climbed into the back seat, the leather cool beneath him. He didn't say anything to the driver, who knew better than to ask questions after what he'd heard. Some moments speak for themselves. The door closed with that solid, expensive thunk that only luxury cars make, sealing Bill in a cocoon of quiet. The sounds of London at night filtered in dimly, the distant rumble of traffic, the far-off wail of a siren, the city living its life completely unaware that television history had just been made in a studio a few streets over. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, the studio's bright lights visible in the side mirror, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared around a corner. Inside the car, Bill finally let out a long breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hands, which had been clenched into fists during the confrontation, slowly relaxed. The adrenaline that had been coursing through his veins was starting to ebb, leaving behind that shaky, hollow feeling that comes after intense conflict. He looked out the window at London passing by, the streets he'd walked 1,000 times, the city that had been his home for decades, all of it looking slightly different now, slightly strange, as if the argument had shifted something fundamental in how he saw the world. The driver merged onto a larger road, picking up speed, carrying Bill Nighy away from the Graham Norton show and into the cold night. Behind them, the studio was probably still in chaos. Graham was probably still trying to finish the show with some semblance of dignity. The producers were probably already on conference calls with network executives, trying to figure out how to handle this disaster. The audience was probably filing out, their phones already glowing with social media apps as they shared their first-hand accounts. But Bill was leaving it all behind, at least physically. The car turned another corner, and the studio was completely out of sight now, as if it had never existed, as if the last few hours had been some kind of fever dream. The heater hummed quietly, warming the interior. The driver had good taste in music, something classical playing softly from the speakers, nothing intrusive, just background texture to fill the silence. Bill closed his eyes for a moment, letting his head rest against the seat back. His phone was buzzing in his pocket. Probably his agent. Probably his publicist. Probably half of London trying to reach him for comment. He ignored it. There would be time for all of that later. Right now, in this moment, in this car moving through the London night, there was just the hum of the engine, the warmth of the heater, and the knowledge that he'd said what he needed to say, consequences be damned. The car continued its journey through the city streets, past pubs where people were laughing and drinking, past cinemas where people were watching films, past homes where families were gathered around televisions, probably watching clips of what had just happened. Life going on, indifferent to the drama, to the confrontation, to the moment that Bill Nighy had decided he'd had enough and walked away from one of the biggest television platforms in the country. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement from an earlier rain, creating shimmering patterns that the car passed through like moving through liquid gold. And somewhere behind them, in that studio, with its bright lights and its famous red couch, Graham Norton was wrapping up the show, probably counting down the seconds until he could escape to his own dressing room, away from the cameras and the audience and the weight of what had happened. Two professionals who'd reached their breaking points, who'd said things that couldn't be unsaid, who'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The fallout would last for days, maybe weeks, maybe longer. But right now, in this moment, Bill Nighy was just a man in a car, heading home through the London night, having left behind the most talked about television moment of the year.